All right, welcome to the Swedish Junior Hockey Podcast. Jacob Dahlin, your host. Today's guest, a Canadian guy that has played a little bit in Sweden that caught my eye. Lucas Venuto. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Shaper. Thanks for having me. Excited to be on with you and chat.
Yeah. So you were just telling me you just got a big rainstorm here in where you are. Where are you? Are you in Mississauga?
No, I'm in Toronto, so I live in North York, so it's kind of a little bit north of the city, a little 20-minute drive downtown.
All right. I should absolutely get better at my Canadian geography, and I'm terrible at it, I admit. So who's Lucas? Tell us about your background a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm from Toronto. I spent my junior career split between the Quebec Major Junior League, the OHL, and some time in the OJHL. And after my overage year in the OHL, I finished up in Windsor. I had the opportunity to go play pro in Sweden, where I spent most of my pro career over there. Played for a couple teams, and then I played in the East Coast Hockey League for a little bit. And and after I retired, I got into some player development roles. So I work with a lot of major junior guys, pro guys, NCAA guys. So when they're done from their seasons, I get on the ice with them, and we're pretty busy. So it's
Good.
good.
Good. Well, I in my little notes, I put in like three different categories here. One, talk about your junior playing juniors in Canada, and we'll go into detail that. Number two, your time and how in the heck did you end up in Sweden, and then we'll finish up in your new role here. So I'm looking at your elite prospects. You know, you were kind of humble. Oh yeah, I did a little this, did a little that. If you break down your stats, and you know how elite prospects does it, well, you were tearing it up in the Canadian juniors in all levels. Uh,
I had a good couple of years there. You could kind of see where I was just had the handcuffs off me a little bit, and I was able to just play my game and succeed. And yeah, it was a good time in my life. I miss playing junior hockey. You're coming up, all you guys, like, you're young, you're having a good time. And I was really lucky to play a part of some good organizations. So it was a lot of fun.
yeah. So you started off. For those that are in Sweden, I think be cool to kind of talk about. So you played U16 and OJHL at the same time, right? Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How,
Yeah. So my draft year in minor midget. So you'll see that happen where um guys that are more highly touted, or they're kind of at the higher end of the draft prospect pool, will actually AP, so call up with tier 2 junior A teams.
yeah.
So as a 15-year-old, I played a few games, a few playoff games, and a few regular season games up with the Streetsville Derbies, and that was like my first taste of junior hockey as a 15-year-old.
Yeah. How is that? So, because not a lot of people that are in Sweden, when you say the draft, everybody thinks about the NHL draft, but what they don't realize is how big the OHL draft is around there. So talk about that. What's it like being 14, 15? You know, is that the first kind of real serious? Now we go from what we call down here in the US youth hockey, you guys call it minor hockey, but
Yeah.
what's it like?
Yeah. So, I mean, across the CHL, so out west and the Q and the OHL, it's a big deal. Like when you're coming up, but specifically being in the GTA here in Toronto, the hockey hub that it is, you start to get a lot of pressure put on you as a 14, 15-year-old, even as a 13-year-old, especially if guys are highly touted and skilled. They'll start being like, oh, this guy's going to be a sure lock for the first round. And it's like, kid's 13 years old, right? And that starts to creep into your ear a little bit. And you kind of learn from a young age a little bit about pressure and handling that. Like, it's a big deal, and there's, you know, 15 rounds, and some kid might get drafted in the 15th round, the last pick, but it's like, it's such a big deal, right? I got drafted. So it's a big deal here, and I think people put a lot of pressure on kids to get drafted when at the end of the day, like you're 15 years old, you're a baby. You know, some guys really don't start coming into their own until they're 18, 19, 20, even in college, 21, 22. You know, it's a long journey, but yeah, it's a big deal and it's pretty nuts. Minor hockey rinks here are packed, like especially when you got guys coming up, like there's the McDavids and there's Shane Wrights and Mikey McLeod's a big one. Like all these types of guys, like in minor hockey, the rinks fill up pretty quickly.
So the three tier one leagues up in Canada, highest leagues, Western Hockey League, WHL, OHL, which is Ontario, and the Q. So
Yep.
how are you? Could you play in either one of them if you are in Ontario? I know there's a lot of restrictions on that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, no. So the technicalities on it, or they change a little bit, but no, like if you're born in Ontario, you got to go. If you end up getting drafted, you're drafted. But if you're a free agent and you don't get drafted, I think you can move to that province. Like if you're gonna go play in the queue, like you can move to Quebec or Nova Scotia or
Yeah.
whatever, and you now go through them and sign as a free agent. And if you are drafted, I believe you're eligible to be in the OHL until a team doesn't roster you for camp. And then you could go on the free agent list and get passed through, and then you start becoming available for the other leagues. So it's not totally common to see guys go to other leagues, but it does happen. For me, I was actually so I played tier two junior in the OJ as a 16-year-old because I had a verbal commitment D1 to a D1 school. And then I ended up going to play in the Q. My family lived in Quebec, so I moved in with my mom.
Okay.
And then that's how I got there.
What about what about U Sports or the Canadian college university hockey? No, you don't hear a lot about that. Everybody just talks about D1 NCAA. Why is that?
It's different. So when I was just getting out of the OHL, it was called the U Sports was called CIS. It was just starting to get a little bit better. Now when you play major junior, there's different school packages. So your
Hmm?
team essentially, depending on the package, pays for your education. So the big thing with D1 and NCAA in general back in the day was go there, get my free education. Well, now if you play major junior, you will get your education as well. So a lot of guys are getting smart where before it'd be like, maybe the third, fourth line guys are signing there sprinkled in with the odd stud. But now like top end point per game players that are thinking, maybe I don't sign a show deal. I don't want to do a two-way American League deal. Maybe I'll go to school, get my education, develop a bit, and then go pro after. Especially if you end up in a program like out east or out west in U Sports, like if you go through their rosters, guys are signing American League deals, or some guys signing, NHL deals. The hockey's gotten really good.
Yeah,
Like it's really good hockey now because you got guys that are point per game players in major junior, and they're only getting bigger, better, faster, more mature. So it's just like a much better version of major junior
yeah.
nowadays.
Um, so if we fast forward, so did you go in the draft? In the OHL draft?
No. So that was a very fun time in my life. I was like a pretty highly touted player. I was projected in the first 3 rounds. I mixed in a couple bad mistakes, some bad advice. I basically had a team. What they do, these teams, is you have phone interviews. So teams call you, have a phone interview just to hear your voice, kind of see what you're like as a young man. And then for some players, they'll actually invite them out to games, and they'll sit them in the stands, and maybe they'll show them around the room, do a little tour. And I was told they're basically like, we want to take you in as our second pick, so in the second round. So whenever you have your phone interview, tell teams you're going to school, which I did. So I recommend you don't do that. And so teams, what that basically does is, if that team doesn't take you in the second round, maybe they could sneak you in the sixth round because teams get scared off. They're like, oh, he's going to go to school or something. So I ended up getting passed through the draft, and then I had offers to go to camps after that, which I was already bitter at that point. So I said, no, I want to go to school.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I had a verbal commitment, and then I ended up changing my mind as a 17-year-old and going to play major junior anyways. So, but no,
Yeah.
I didn't get drafted.
And then when you take that going major junior, then you have a fork in the road, and once you do that, you can't go NCAA, right?
You can, but you have to redshirt. And I forget what the rule is exactly, but it's I could be wrong about this. It might be every game played in a season is a year. You have to redshirt or something along those lines. But either way, as soon as you dress and play a game, you have to redshirt a year. So you can still go to the NCAA, but you're missing hockey for a year.
Yeah. I it's going to be so interesting in the next few years what's going to change with Canadian juniors and NCAA. It's bound to do something. Um, uh,
Yeah.
I think so. All right, phase two here, Mudrum. Uh, and I think when you and I talked offline, for some reason I was thinking it was around Gothenburg, but I'm from Leksand, which is more in the central north, up further north. So anything's
Yeah.
further down, my geography gets real shaky. But it's really way down south. How did you end up there? Hockeyettan, which is
Yeah.
third division, which is good hockey. So let's talk about how you ended up there and what was your thoughts when you got there.
Yeah, so I had a really good overager season after I got traded to Windsor in the OHL. I was over a point per game.
Yeah,
Um,
31
and
games. Windsor Spitfires OHL, 31 games, 35 points, 14 goals, 21 apples.
yeah, I had a good opportunity there. I was, kind of the overage year for a lot of guys that don't get drafted or that they're, trying to sign an entry level or an American League deal. It's a big year. And you can only have a few overagers on your team. So it's tough fighting for a job. And I was in Mississauga and I started well. My first like 5 or 6 games, I was just over a point per game. And then we had some young talent that they wanted to develop. So, they basically said, hey, like we're kind of rebuilding here. So I kind of took a back seat, which hurt me. I went like 18 games without a point. I was barely playing. It was really tough. So I got called in the office one day and GM goes, I got some bad news. So I'm like, oh, great. Like I'm getting cut. Like I'm having a tough year. He's like, I just traded you. Ended up being the best thing to happen to me. So I had a really good year. I had some offers to go play in the East Coast Hockey League, but there's a lot of shuffle that happens there. So I said, you know what? I want to go play in youth sports. So I signed a letter of intent to go to the University of PEI. They had an excellent program out there. They have a really good thing going on, and it's a really good division. And then someone came along just in the hockey world and who has a lot of experience in Sweden and played there, coached there, scouted, and he's basically like, what do you think about playing pro in Sweden? I said, that sounds pretty awesome. I've played with Swedes in my major junior career, great people, and I knew a little bit about the country. I was like, why not? So yeah, I ended up there. And I kind of got the drive. I was like, you know what? I want to stay here. I want to move up to Allsvenskan. I want to move up all the way through. And so yeah, so I put in some time there, and that's kind of how I ended up there.
Yeah. So Hockeyettan, what was your thought first of all? Because I mean, you worked really hard. I'm sure you kind of living the dream. You're playing OHL, and you're hoping to be able to go play in the NHL. It didn't happen. You started to see that how it works. It's a cutthroat business, and they're putting their you could see how they're changing the philosophy of I want to give this person that maybe the 17-year-old the ice time, even though they may not be as good, but that's just kind of how it is. And then you see the train kind of leaving the station, and that's the NHL dream is sort of running away from you. But then you have this opportunity to go a new chapter. But what was your first impression? Oh, third division? Or what was your like you wanted to go straight in the SHL?
Yeah, like I knew. Well, yeah,
Which
like I'm
is which
not
is a
naive.
little unrealistic, right?
Yeah, like I'm not naive. Like I know what it takes to get to SHL. Like I know the resumes that are required. Like you need a lot of American League games and some NHL games to get in there. So like I wasn't expecting to go play SHL. Like I actually practiced with Oscar Sam during the National League break, and like that was fun and it was a good experience. And like kept pace just fine. And yeah, so originally I got really sold on, oh, you'd be up in Allsvenskan after your first year, which, you know, based on my stats in my first year pro, like I did really well. And, I started to see, like, as a Canadian to go up through that route, it's really difficult. So I'll backtrack a little bit. So yeah, I got there as like third league, but I know Sweden's a hockey country, so it's very deep. It's not like you're going to a third league in some random country where it's not
No, no.
very good. So I wasn't too worried, and like I was confident in my abilities. So I got there, and it's just a little different, right? Like I'm used to playing in front of 7,000 fans every game, and like when I played in the queue, the Quebec Ramparts would get 15,000 fans a game, and angry French people fans, like, you know, yelling at you, throwing stuff. So like, I got into Morum's little tiny barn. We get our little 1,000 fans, but I loved it. Like I love that feeling. Like it felt like it wasn't superficial hockey. It was that old barn Swedish. Like I loved it. So I didn't really care that I wasn't in front of 10,000 people, and they treated me well. Like it is professional, and no, it
And,
was
and
good.
and let's be frank. I mean, where I'm from, Leksand, who's a big hockey culture, have 6,000 people in the stands is packed, is sold out. So put things
Yeah,
into kind of
that's a
perspective.
great.
That's in the SHL.
Yeah,
Um, so
that's a great rink. I've watched games there. I loved it.
yeah, when I grew up, it was in the old rink, which they tore down. Now it's nicer, but still um, still an awesome place with an awesome atmosphere. But it's 6,000 people is not like 15,000, and very
Mhm.
few arenas in Sweden have the capacity to compete with how it is in Canada.
Yeah.
All right, so but and then you ended up in year two. Was it so you did first year? Was it automatic that you were going back for second year, or how did that?
Um. Yeah, I think at that point it was kind of like when I was in Morum, we were a really bad team, and I think you know. Here's the thing: is when you go over to a hockey country like Sweden, they like there's already good players like across the board. They bring in an import to kind of be an outside the box player. Maybe a
Yeah,
little bit more flashy, maybe a bit more high risk, high reward, power play, whatever. Right. So I knew that just coming out of the OHL, I had to have worked my way up there. So like, okay, I started on a bad team. I had a really good year. Now I'm on the top team. So I signed with Krihanstad, and that is an amazing place to play. So I went there. I pretty much signed like right after the season, like very quickly. And yeah, I was like, okay, now I'm on a good team. And with the promotion relegation, I was like, let's try to move up here. I loved it. I don't really regret too many things in my career. I learned a lot from my mistakes. One of the things I do regret is leaving there. I left there about 14 games in. It was in November, and one of the reasons why I left was I had a really bad concussion, and I had an opportunity to go back home and play pro in North America, in the East Coast Hockey League with call it a little verbal. Maybe you'll get called up to the American League, and that
yeah.
was enough to be like, okay, it's my second bad concussion. I might not get this opportunity again to go do that. I'm gonna go and do that. And I walked onto a team in Brampton that was already really good. So I was just fighting for a spot in the lineup. And I had an amazing coach who taught me a lot about the game, a game away from the puck, which I needed to work on. So it was great. So I went there, played on a great veteran team, learned a lot. We had a great time. We had a really good playoff run, and yeah, so I ended up leaving Kronsta midway through the year, and jumped in the East Coast Hockey League.
All right, so I have to ask you too, how quickly did you when you first saw Kristianstad, when you read, so for those that go to your elite prospects, because I had this conversation with Ted Soikanen before, because he got on the train, and I think he played in Kristianstad as well, and he missed the train station because he's looking for something else, because it's spelled Christianstad, but it's not pronounced Christianstad.
So I actually, when I landed, because we just land in Copenhagen and then take the
Yep,
train over. I think there's a Christianstad in Denmark.
there is.
So I was taking the train there, and I remember just from the year before taking the train, I'm like, I feel like I'm going the wrong way. And the lady on the train was actually really nice, and I was like, I don't know where I'm going here. And she was nice enough. I hopped off the train. She redirected me, put me on the right train. So I was. Yeah, it took me a little bit to get Kristianstad, but yeah, I was saying Christianstad. I'm like, how do I get to Christianstad, Sweden? People are like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then in the southern part of Sweden, the dialects are fairly heavy,
Yeah,
compared to the central parts of Sweden, or even in the western part. So, all right, and then
yeah.
but then you end up in my old stomping ground. I went to college prep in Borlänge. I actually lived in, if you remember, Tjärna Ängar, where all the crime happens. That's where I
Yep.
lived.
Oh yeah. You were the kingpin there, weren't you?
I was kind of living large. No, I can't say that,
There you go.
but I did have an apartment right there, and this was 30 years ago. So it was bad then. It's really bad now, but I actually
Oh
played in
yeah.
that rink. Borlänge used to be called HC Dobel. Um,
Okay.
and now it's called Borlänge. And they still got a good team. They've kind of had a relationship with Leksand, almost like a minor league affiliate to a certain degree. Even though
Mhm.
it's two, so you have a lot of juniors that are coming from the teams like Leksand that maybe didn't get an SHL contract, and then they get loaned out to places like Borlänge. And then
Yeah.
also Västerås, the place where I was born, actually. So lots of commonalities here. So three
There
more
you
years,
go.
yeah, 3 more years or 2 more years with three teams in Sweden.
Yep.
So what was your big takeaway from? So overall, 4 years. Uh, so you ended up you're in finishing up your career there
Yep.
in Sweden. What was your biggest so when we talk about Hockey Ettan, the third division, how would you describe it for those who don't know anything about Swedish hockey?
First of all, it's good hockey. Like I said before, you're not going to a third division in a non-hockey country. Like it's a very deep country. And if you're going to talk about like 1, 2, 3 leagues, it'd be like in North America where we got, the NHL, which would be your SHL, Allsvenskan would be your American League, and Hockey Etan would be your East Coast League.
Yeah.
And if we're not comparing those leagues side by side, but it's as deep as you would, say for that. Like it's really good hockey. Hockey Etan gets really good once you get into All-Etan. In the regular season to start, you really see the difference between the top teams and the bottom teams. But once you get into Aleton, hockey really tightens up. Like it's all good teams, and it only gets better. Like by the time we got into Kvalserien, we're playing against some Allsvenskan teams, and the best hockey Eton teams. It's really good. It's fast. It's highly skilled, and it's gritty. It's gritty enough. People aren't necessarily fighting each other, but checks are being finished all the time. Guys, it's hardworking hockey. Like it was a lot of fun to play. It's really good.
What was your feeling about the average age, so to speak, on the teams that you were on? Was it a mixture of the veterans and a lot of the young guys that are on loan, or in terms of the talent level, maybe undeveloped?
Um, that's a good question. It varied, right? So for all the teams I played for, so especially so when I was in Kristianstad, like I was only 22, right? So it's my second year pro, and you're walking into a pro league in your second year pro. The team's a bit older. I think the average age must have been hovering around 28, 29, 30. And we had some really good veteran players. And you're stepping into a first line, first PP role. So it pushed me as a young guy. And it's tough to navigate to a certain extent because like I was playing in the East Coast League, and our veterans are guys that were on NHL contracts. And we had one player, David Ling, and he had played pro for like 23 years, and he played the KHL, NHL, American League, NLA, like all the top leagues in Europe. And he was like that. There's that veteran. And then there's the guys that have been in Sweden for 10, 12 years. And you see the difference in the way they were a little bit. So I grabbed a lot of good like nuggets from those guys that were, just in Sweden for that many years. It was just a different type of veteran. It's kind of difficult to explain, but it was really interesting experience.
What about how many of those guys were working a second job?
I'd say pretty much all of them.
But but
Like
but they
pretty
have
much all of them.
but they may have worked a part-time second job, right?
Yeah, like a part-time second job. Yeah, they weren't going like 9 to 5 in the practice after. I can't remember. Like in Kronstadt, we practiced at around 2 o'clock or one
Yeah.
o'clock. So, and I'm the only guy on the team that's not working. Like it's hockey's my job there. So, there's actually a couple guys on the team that didn't work. So we'd be at the rink watching like TV, working out in the morning, and then we'd go on the ice early. We'd practice, stay at the rink after. So there's some guys that didn't work, but yeah, mostly part time. And I think even in Allsvenskan, some guys work part time too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's common, which is interesting because, excuse me, like here the thought about doing that like in the East Coast League, like it's not possible. You play 72 games. The I don't think here's something for Swedish players is the travel in Sweden is lightweight.
Yeah.
Like we would play a game in Brampton, which is just outside of Toronto, and you're taking a bus to, Allen, Texas, or the Idaho. Like if you're going cross conference, like you're spending hundreds of hours on a bus in a season, like hundreds. We were playing against Manchester and went around the playoffs, and they were flying back and forth to games, and we were busing. And that's like a 13-hour, 14-hour bus. And like you play a game, bus there, sleep in the bus, play a game, play another game after that, sleep in the bus, bus back. Like you live in a bus.
Yeah.
So one of the appealing parts about playing in Sweden was the travel wasn't too bad.
Yeah. Well, and especially for those who are playing in the division below, those are really short bus rides, maybe two
Oh
hours
yeah.
in the second division. That I think that's what about last question about that is what was your impression of how many of those guys thought about college and college sports? Do you have any recollection of that?
Not really. Like some guys would ask, what it's like what the college life is like, and I can only say it through the tours I went on when I was younger, when I was getting recruited, and buddies of mine that played in college. Because everyone would always ask me what's like playing the OHL, because that's where I played. So I was talking always a lot about major junior,
Yeah.
um, but not some guys would always poke around about the NCAA because I know there's we have the import draft in the CHL, and you see like Swedes go in that, but you see some Swedes go from junior there to NCAA. So
What about the Swedish university? It's a
what about it? I know
yeah.
nothing about it. No,
It's a little bit of a trick question because it's really to me it's one of the big drawbacks or not. I don't know. I just think it's a huge advantage that U.S. and Canada have is the how good college sports in general is, and then you have a university degree. And if you were to look at SHL, Allsvenskan, Division One, Division Two, and you can count how few people that actually earn a college degree.
yeah,
So now it's not that big of a deal because it's not having a college degree in Sweden maybe not as big of a deal as it is in North America, but it's to me it's a big missing link of you have the hockey gymnasium for the kids that are high school and then the equivalent of one more year, but then there's no more education, and
yeah,
how few of the actual athletes go back and get their degree versus the pro athlete that comes out and they have a college degree or the ones that didn't make it in the NHL or the AHL, and but man, they had an awesome experience in university athletics and being part of that fraternity. I think that it's something that Sweden is behind on, and they could really have it, in my opinion. But anyway, um,
Yeah.
so let's move on to so now you look back, you've played at a really high level, both in front of crowds in Canada, and you've been a different 5 different places in Sweden. You come back now to uh you know where you are now in Toronto, and you have this experience that very few people have. So let's talk about the third part here, life after playing. And how does your how does that change you, and how do you leverage that in your current, of course you played hockey all your life, so you learned a skill that you can now translate by showing other people in skill development. But then you're also working, talk about Monarch Advisory Group, and how did you end up there, and what's your role there, and then we can talk a little bit more in detail about how you take the experiences and share them.
Yeah. So life after hockey. Yeah, that's an interesting one. So, I mean, everyone that's played the game goes through their own ups and downs, and everyone retires either on their own terms or through injury. And it's just, everyone's got to navigate life after hockey. It's a big change, especially when you play professionally and you're at the rink in the morning, you practice, you're at the rink after, and you go home, or you're in the hotels all day. So to adjust to like a 9 to 5 job, a lot of guys struggle. And it's just an everyday battle. It takes years to adjust. Some people get a little bit quicker than others, but it takes a long time. Ego is a big part of it too. Like, you feel, maybe you're watching a game, you're like, I was better than that guy, like, or oh, I could have done that, or maybe I make a comeback, like, it's a big mental and ego battle. But no, when I retired, I stayed in the game. I was gonna coach. I'm really passionate about player development. um so I've been really into that, and I have a good group of college and major, junior, and pro guys. Yeah, so I joined Monarch Advisory Group about 6 months ago. um Kyle is the head agent owner, and we can actually connect on LinkedIn. And we had a really good conversation, and I really have had bad experiences pretty much my whole career with agents, as a lot of guys do. So he reached out to me, to say, like, let's connect, let's talk, because I had seen they were looking for advisors. I was like, okay, we'll see. And we had a great conversation, and he's a really genuine, down to earth guy, and he's sick of players going through these scenarios where they have an agent, but he's not doing anything for me. And agents are not miracle workers. Like, they don't just snap your fingers and find a team. But a lot of times you're finding agents being like, oh, I'm talking to this team, I'm talking to that team, but really they're not talking to anyone. They just give you enough to make you feel like they're doing something. And Kyle and all the agents at Monarch are people that actually back up what they say. They work tirelessly, and they're on it. We represent our players as best as humanly possible. So I really was buying into what he was saying. He played the game. He went through a bunch of stuff too, and he decided he wanted to do something about it. So I thought it was a good fit, and yeah, so I jumped on board with them.
Yeah. So what's let's address what's the difference between an advisor and an agent from your perspective in Canada, right?
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
back in the day,
The Canadian kids are maybe not as it's not as big of a deal to sign with an agent if you're going to go and play in the OHL.
yeah. So, like, look, I had an agent when I was like 12 years old. So a lot of it's very common here when you play in the GTHL, which is our, like, it's arguably the best minor hockey AAA league in the world, as most
Yep.
people like to call it. But there's a lot of really high end talent that comes out of there. So a lot of parents go and seek agents, or agents seek them. they'll try to jump on a kid early. Like if there's a McDavid or another superstar coming up in the ranks, they'll try to jump on those guys early, and try to keep them happy all the way through. The problem is you get an agency that signs a guy like of that caliber, and then now that agent's walking around the rinks and maybe approaches your kid and says, "I'd like to represent your guy," and you go, "Oh, I'm with this agency now, and they got all these NHL players and all these pro guys, but my kid's only 16 and maybe he's a middle of the pack OHL draft pick or something." You end up becoming kind of brushed off to the side and getting stuck in those agencies. Um, it's not always the case, but it does happen quite often.
So
So
so who should get
it's
an agent? Let's go there. Or who should get an
pardon me.
advisor versus who should get an agent versus an advisor? Who, you know,
It's so circumstantial. Look, if you're a superstar like at 15 years old and you're getting drafted in the first or second round of the OHL, and the agents and the advisors, they'll come up to you anyways, and you're basically gonna have your pick at like who you want to jump on board with. But anything after that is, you're kind of trying to play a bit of a longer game where, you're maybe, oh, okay, my son has some talent, but he might be a bit of a late bloomer. So maybe we get an advisor and could advise us over the next 3 years, maybe get us into junior A, tier two, junior B, whatever. And maybe if they're good enough and have developed by the time they're 18 or 19, you have colleges and universities start taking a look. So it's circumstantial. I mean, if you're highly touted right out of the gate as like a 14, 15-year-old, they're going to come to you. But after that, it's more about playing, like I said, a bit of a longer game. So
yeah. So if you are, what if you're a Swede? Because I'm sure that there's Swedes that are want to come over here to North America. It's got to be difficult to navigate, and having someone that can do it for you would almost be a requirement.
yeah, that's a bit of a different situation. So yeah, there's two sides to that. So one, yeah, it's if you're
I
a
mean,
Swedish player,
it's almost like where you were going to Sweden and you didn't know how to navigate, don't have the connections over there versus,
exactly.
right?
Yeah. If you're a Swedish player playing junior, yeah, and you want to come over here, yeah, you're gonna need someone that knows the landscape here, but that also understands the landscape in Sweden, right? So they have to understand where you're coming from and what assets do you have, or like how are you as a young man, or all these different things. There's so many circumstances that like they need to know about where you're coming from before they try to get you over here.
What would you have since you went through some difficult, and I've heard a lot of people talk about, wish I would have done this and that, and they jumped on something and they got recommended this guy or that guy. What would be the one or two things that you would give advice on regarding hiring an advisor or an agent in terms of who is going to be the right guy or gal?
Like if you're a parent or a player from
Yep.
Sweden, I say take your time and interview multiple companies, like interview multiple people. At the end of the day, people I think have a bit of a short sight on hockey and a career to a certain extent, where they just think about, you know, this move might impact my next season. And I get it. We just take it one season at a time, one day at a time, but try to kind of settle things down, interview multiple people and think, okay, I'm 17 years old playing junior. I'd like to play in the NCAA by the time I'm 20 or 21, and interview multiple people and see what that long-term plan is. Like, see how, if they are big on their development, do they watch your games during the season? Even if they're abroad, like, do they watch you? Do they converse with you? Do they, are they helping you find trainers or whatever it may be, right? You want someone that's fully in your corner. And there's a lot of good player agents and advisors out there. There is, but there's also a lot of not great options. So it's really up to the parents and the player to interview multiple people and kind of weed out, you know, the
Explain
weak
too,
ones.
like there's some that may be great for this person, but not the right fit for you. Because like what you were
For
talking
sure.
about, okay, maybe Connor Bedard's agent is not going to be working as hard for you because he's working really hard for Connor Bedard. Not,
Yeah.
my point is that maybe you need to be real with what your level is and be, if you are not going to be an NHL guy, but you want to be a college guy, maybe you shouldn't be going after the agents that are representing the NHL guys, but the ones that are, man,
Yeah.
this is my sweet spot and this is my clientele.
Yeah, that's another thing too, right? Is I mean, you do want to have that mindset that you are maybe a little bit better than you think you are, right? You want to feel like, you know what, maybe I can get there, maybe I could do that. But
Yeah, yeah,
you also, right? So you want to have a little bit of that, but yeah, you can't be like, I'm playing in hockey Twan and I'm gonna play. I want to get to the NHL in 2 years, right? Like you
yeah.
can't be a little bit, not. That being said, I played with a guy who went from hockey Twan to the NHL in like 4 years, so it happens.
It
That's not what I'm
happens.
saying, but it's few and far between. Okay, but no, it's yeah, you got to be a little bit realistic of what your goals are, and you got to have a bit of a plan. Like, so when I went to Sweden, I wasn't just thinking I want to get up to SHL. I went over there thinking, okay, if I do well here, I could get up to Allsvenskan. If I get up to Allsvenskan and do well, maybe I could hop back to the American League. And then so I was looking as for stepping stones.
Yep.
You got to have that same mentality. I feel like is okay. I'm 17. I'm playing junior. I want to get to the NCAA. I'm on a good team now. How do I take a stepping stone, right? So
But
you just got to navigate that.
ultimately it's up to you as a player. You got to be the
Yeah,
one. I mean, an agent or an advisor can't do but so much, right? And
exactly.
so, yeah, I think that that's
It's
a, I, I
yeah,
think I think it's a interesting with your background. You become an expert after the fact, right? And you're in a unique kind of rounding out a little bit here, but you're in a unique position where you're young, not too far removed from playing, which gives you a really good advantage. You have experiences that you can share, and
for sure.
um, and I think that that's important. There's there's a lot of golf coaches that are terrible golfers, right? There's a lot of
Right.
hockey coaches that are terrible. They can't skate. I mean, I could probably put myself in that in that. I'm not as good of a skater anymore. I've kind of realized that, but at the same time, it's the ability to connect with the right person, to truly form relationships, to be able to, you could your advice is only as good as the person that is willing to listen too, right? So the ability
For
to
sure.
align
Yeah.
is important. So
Yeah, 100%. No, and like that, it's really, and look, like kind of like you said, hindsight's 2020. So after the fact, you're able to break down and assess your kind of path a little bit, and that's why I kind of stress that if you are someone, let's say a Sweden playing in junior, you want to get over to college, and you are seeking an advisor, is to really do your due diligence and take your time. And you don't need an agent like that minute. Like it's you want to have someone in your corner that's gonna look out for you and just be there for you, right? So my advice, yeah, just don't rush into things. Talk to multiple people. Get as much information as possible.
all right, so I asked this question to a lot of people at the end, and that is, so you're 29 now, right? 29.
Yeah,
You're going to stay there 29, I know, but you meet yourself 12 years younger. You're 17. You sidle up to them, and as a 17-year-old, they're not going to ask you for advice, but you're going to give it anyway as a 29-year-old. What advice would you give yourself when you were 17 that you know now that you didn't know then?
when I was 17, wow. For me personally, yeah, I probably had a bit of a chip on my shoulder, so I probably would have told myself to settle down a little bit. Um, I always thought, I was raised that respect is a two-way street, but especially when I got into the queue, I was 17. They tested me. Like my coaches were really testing me, and I didn't really play into their game very much in the wrong way. I pushed back a little bit too hard, and I would tell myself at 17 to maybe just kind of roll with it. And that actually kind of goes back to how I was in Sweden. Like my first year or two there, there's the Swedish way,
Yep.
and it's a little bit less confrontational. It's a little bit different than here. Like I'm used to a coach coming in after a game after a bad loss and just blasting us. But when a coach is coming in and asking, what do you think, guys? Like, what can we do better? I was a little bit taken back. I had to readjust how I was off the ice a little bit.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I mean, I think that that's the way we learn along the way. And again, that's the position that you're, yeah, that you're in now to give back. And it's going to be fun. You're probably going to look back at yourself in your current role 5 years from now and say, man, I'm so much better today than I was 5 years ago in my current position, right? But you grow and you learn along the way.
Mhm.
All right, last thing.
Yeah.
So what's the best way people can find you on Monarch Advisory Group.ca, but what other ways is if they want to get in touch with you, chat with you, uh, use you from a standpoint of as an advisor or just to be able to talk, what's the best way to reach you?
I'm on LinkedIn, so you could always connect with me on LinkedIn and shoot me a message. I have, I have time for people that are looking for advice, and they're just curious. Like I do have a pretty like interesting, unique experience,
Yeah.
and I've had I've been very lucky that I've been able to step back outside the game and really assess kind of my whole journey and pick it apart so that I can help the next group of players come up and help them navigate it. So yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'll say my door is always open, but my inbox is open. You can send me a message, and I'd be happy to chat. And even if anyone just wants to pick my brain, or I'd be more than happy to.
Now, what about the younger guys? Because there's not an 18-year-old that has LinkedIn, right? There's a few that do, but are you on Instagram and
No, I am not. I am not on Instagram. I have stayed off Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all that fun TikTok stuff. No, I'm off it. And I guess yeah, I mean, LinkedIn it's a good way to network for sure. Like
yeah,
it's got that more professional feel. So even as an 18-year-old, like if you even get it just and start following all these different hockey pages, and there's so many professional players and coaches and trainers on there where even if you're a Swedish player in junior and you're like, I'd love to go train in North America for a week or two, and you can find different trainers like myself, and there's so many people doing it that you could reach out to them via LinkedIn and be like, hey, like what would this look like if I wanted to come over and train for a couple weeks? So get
yeah.
on LinkedIn. Just
I agree. I think that's a great advice to just to create a profile, connect to some of the hockey groups, and it's a good forum. It's not just for accountants and lawyers. It's really for everybody. So, hey, Lucas, I
no, it's
appreciate.
great.
I know you're on your way to another skills clinic, and thanks for taking the time. And I'll be pumping you for some good. I'm trying to market this a little bit better, but so I'll be pumping you for some highlight videos, and we'll release it on Instagram for you. So,
Okay, right on. No, I appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time. I had a great time chatting with you.
all right, thanks, man.